one of the many state-owned enterprises that are in trouble, and it's a major talking point because we're trying to figure things out, and I would imagine investors abroad are busy watching our country and trying to figure things out as well. Well, to help us maybe unpack some of it and make some sense of it is Lesiba Mothata, who's the Executive Chief Economist at Investment Solutions. Lesiba, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Peter.
So I hope you can work all these out. Let's start with SAA because it does speak to I mean, huge 9 billion debt. You and I actually are the guarantors of that debt as the public.
Correct.
And the reality is, if we struggle, if we fail, it has a ripple effect right across, doesn't it? Our whole sort of lending and guaranteeing structure.
Indeed it does. And at this point, the lenders will be concerned about how the environment has changed, not only for SAA in its operating environment, but the economic environment has changed. When in junk status, what happens is the cost of funding, even without the SAB having moved on interest rates, naturally goes up. That's why there'll be reluctance whether they want to roll it over, they will want payment, they will call it sooner, which I believe is some of the discussion that happen here. Tough decisions can be made this time around. To what end will we continue to bail out an institution without any material reform? I think the minister now has an opportunity to reform. He comes from the state-owned enterprise ministries. He understands them fully. I think he's best capable to make the tough decisions, which will include allowing other investors to participate in this type of outcome here.
Because Telkom's a good example of this sort of partnership with the private sector. Lesiba Mothata has done an amazing job turning around Telkom, and that could be SAA, that could be Transnet, that could be PRASA.
Indeed, within obviously the limits of trying to understand which one is developmental. I do think we need to support the state utility. Electricity is very important from that end, but the other discussions ought to arrive here. Because if you just move that knob, and it's really not difficult. I appreciate it could be difficult in the sense of political decision, but economically, once you open it up, you will see how an institution like SAA could thrive from here.
All right, okay. So, you know, this conversation, at the back of your mind, just think someone's busy trying to figure out the state of South Africa. So the next thing, the Reserve Bank governor goes to court to say, leave me alone, to the public protector. That also sends a confusing message to people trying to figure out what's going on in our country.
I commend the governor.
Yeah.
This is an important matter. It is not a small matter, because once you deal with the mandate of the SAB as it would be proposed at the moment, it means you're actually changing course of the entire democratic South Africa we have understood since 1994. It is a complete shift of economic policy. In fact, it will be dealing a blow to an institution that's holding us together right now. For example, we're not being downgraded on the rand-denominated debt for reasons that include we've got a predictable, a sustainable, strong, internationally acclaimed Reserve Bank. And once you start tapering the way they're proposing is problematic. You could see in the language he's talking, you could see in the seriousness he's taking this, that this is no small matter. It ought not to actually be repeated. I hope those that are making policy, because there's clear differentiation now. The policy that has been put together is very different to that we hear in the implementation of that policy. In other words, there's a state, and there are those that are producing the policy. And those that are producing the policy gather in later this month, early July, will have a very different take to this matter.
ANC policy conference is coming up shortly. But in the lead up to this, it's quite clear that the party is divided because we're hearing different views. One faction will say there's no such thing as white monopoly capital. Another one will say we need radical economic transformation. And so all of these mixed messages, how are the markets reacting to this? You know, has the rand moved as a result of the Reserve Bank? What are they factoring in when they hear the ruling party disagreeing with itself?
Although there are noises that you'll hear on TV, read in the media, what's interesting is that markets they love detail. And when you apply a mind to what has been written in these documents that will be discussed, and you compare them, for example, to the 1993 Ready to Govern document, you see stark resemblances. In it, it talks about South Africa still on course. Admittedly, there are voices that are coming in along the way, and I'll argue, from our own assessment, it's fewer. It's fewer voices that are suggesting that South Africa is off course. When I say of course, I mean it's no longer the same as the document that was written in 1993 around Ready to Govern. That which is now in discussion, it's still right bang to where SA has been understood to be and to where SA ought to be. So the market sees that, and it's surprising to see, even after junk, even after recession, we continue to see demand for bonds from foreigners. Although it is a wall of money that's coming into SA and that's helping, it's helping, the global forces are helping SA, but you cannot discount that even with that positive outcome towards the emerging market, SA has looked along its institutions, along its policy tracks, which I hope that after the discussion beginning of July will confirm we remain on those tracks, which is a good thing.
But you say this, but you know, you've got Gupta leaks on slow drip. Every day or every week something more is revealed. So we don't know when the bottom of this is going to happen. You've got the fallout from the mining charter and the mining sector sort of turbulence going on there. An economy that's shrinking, in recession, job losses at record levels, rand weakening. How do we stay optimistic in with all of that data and information? Yeah.
I think we will remain on course on what is written in terms of policy.
No, but we've written and we're worse off.
We've written we're worse off. I wouldn't argue we're worse off. Things could have been worse off. In fact, if you look even the record low jobs, the record low economic activity in recession, if we were not part of the global economy, things could have been materially worse than where we are now. So while it feels all hard, and I do think that we need to grind to the floor, and in that time, people make the right decisions. You have to choose the right leaders. You have to make sure that governance continue in this end, hopefully in this time as South Africans, especially to those that are gathering within making decisions around policy and later around leadership in terms of elections. They'll begin to vote accordingly in the interest of the country. For not all is lost. I'm of the view there are more that get it than those that don't.
Okay, so talking about getting it, they often say that the stock market knows things ahead of time. But ours tends to be a bit misleading, though. If you take out Naspers and Richemont, they don't really reflect the local scenario. If they're doing well, we think we're doing well, and we probably aren't. So take those out of the equation. The markets are telling you that it's not a great story to tell.
Oh, I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure. Remember when you get junk stages, you get recessions. Remember, the infrastructure of a country does not get broken down at once. Fiscal infrastructure, roads, bridges, don't just disappear. Along with the institutional infrastructure, there is some erosion that's happening, but still that remains intact. In fact, it is a time like these that investors can find gems in terms of cheapness of assets. It's interesting that banks, which are much more married towards what's happening around the national treasury and its issuance of bonds, foreign investors have been participating there much more aggressively relative to domestic investors. And therein it tells you the story that when there's disagreements about where we are going, it could actually unlock a lot of value for investors, especially in a country with such deep and mature assets like we have in SA.
So Mr. Investor phones you from the UK. Lesiba, I have 3 billion that I need to invest. When do I invest it in South Africa? Give me a date.
You look at now, because relative to other emerging market countries, well, you go to Russia, well, there's a problem there. It's cheap for a reason. You go to Brazil, its political situation is not sorted. You can't arrive in China, you can't arrive in India. Where else do you look in relation to other emerging markets? You come to SA. With all its problems, it does look better than the rest, depending on what happens on the leadership, and therein is what we can change and what we can control.
And what's still to come out in the Gupta leaks. Thank you very much indeed, Lesiba, for trying to make sense of some of the noise that's out there. Always a pleasure having you on the program.
Pleasure.
Okay, Francis, that's where we're going to leave it for the time being. Francis?